I'm so glad that I had the chance to grow up here and in a congregation where people were interested in evangelism and had good mentors and people who showed interest in that, and thankful for the ongoing support of the congregation in the work that we've tried to do. Even though our international work is a little bit more limited than what it used to be, or what we had longed for it to be, we're glad to be able to do local work in Eudora, and feel like we have a good congregation there, and we're so thankful for the faithful there and their willingness to let us take these trips, even though it means we're going to be away for a few weeks each year. So we've kind of struck a balance in that, but I'm so thankful for the congregation here and the great support that's always been from here, and the wisdom of the eldership here, who I've turned to many times for advice, and sometimes they've offered it when I didn't ask and I needed it. And I'm thankful for that as well. With this year, Beth and I did not go to the Philippines. We want to do that next year. She was advised, because of the Zika, that they didn't want pregnant people going to the Philippines, even though I think that that's probably a lot of hoopla, but that's my opinion. But I'm not the doctor, so. But anyway, we're planning to take her next year. But one of the things that we had talked about before, it was the idea of going over, for me, stopping at least in Latvia for a little bit to try to see what I could do there to kind of help. A few months ago, Victor, who preaches there, had posted a very discouraging picture, and it was when worship was getting ready to start, and there were two people besides him there present, and it was something that was kind of, you could tell he's just kind of tired and discouraged. And so I had talked to Beth about maybe me stopping by there on the way to the Philippines and doing that. And it was just kind of an idea we were kicking around until we decided not to go to the Philippines, and we discussed going ahead and trying to go to Latvia if we could work it out, and the elders here were supportive of that, so thankful for that opportunity. As many of you know, I worked for several years with the church in Latvia from 1992, which the church began in 1992 there when the first people obeyed the gospel, and I was there. I arrived to move there a couple days after. My first time to go there for 3 weeks was about 2 days after the first person was baptized. So I was kind of part of that the whole time, and the church here was very instrumental and supportive of me in that time. And then over the years, I've had a chance to go back. As of now, the last time I had been there was in 2010, and a brother Gunnars Putinas was always a good friend and a help in the church there, and he had passed away, unfortunately, we think he probably could have been spared, but they weren't very attentive to him. So I was over there in 2010 to help bury him. And then this year was 2018, so a lot of things have changed over the years, and I was glad to have a chance to kind of get an idea of how things are, but I wish I had a different opinion about some of the things that are going on over there. I was there early this year in March and April, and so what we're going to do, my purpose for this trip, and I'll tell you a little bit about Latvia, in case you're not familiar with it, but I wanted to reconnect with some of the members who I've known who had fallen away. And there are some who had fallen away, and we tried to reach out to them. We wanted to edify those who are faithful, and we also wanted to try to make some new disciples, try to reach new people to teach. And I reached out to people that I had known for many years. Some of them you've met, actually. One of them you've met. To try to see if we couldn't break down some barriers and get people to start making the right choices, and then to kind of look at the situation there of the work and kind of see where it is and if there's anything we could do to maybe try to help. Well, Latvia is Northern Europe, and you can see where it's a little country. It's about half the size of the state of Missouri. Population used to be about half the population of Missouri. I think it's actually declined since the European Union, since they joined the European Union, and they can travel to other European countries now. A lot of people have left because the opportunities are better for jobs and things like that. And of course, that means a certain demographic of ages and things like that are the people that are gone. And so that has an effect on the country. It's also, over the years since I was there, we're starting to see a lot more influence from Russia in Latvia, and you know, people talk about their how they want to influence our elections. Well, they've been a big influence on the elections in those border countries, and so just a little bit closer up, you can see the boundary between Russia and Latvia, how it runs along Finland and Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, and well, actually it doesn't border Lithuania, but Belarus and Ukraine, and so what's been happening is there has been a lot of more Russian politicians elected into office, and they're trying to shift things back to be more favorable. It's kind of a behind-the-scenes approach to try to people are afraid, actually, that they're going to try to undermine the independence of the country again. So that's something to kind of watch, but we'll see what happens. They're still NATO country, and there's NATO base that's over there, and so so they're, I don't think going to be too big of a risk, but there are people nervous about it. And Mark de Avila, I don't have a better picture. I didn't block out the first guy, but it's hard to take a selfie with two fat guys. But Mark de Avila had joined me on this trip, and many of you remember that he and Jazz came last year for the lectureship. They weren't able to spend a whole lot of time here because of his health, but he had a heart transplant in April the year before, and so I mean it was just almost a year to exactly, and they gave him a clean bill of health. They said, you go ahead and take the trip, you're fine, and he was ready for that. So he met me. One of the things that he had told them whenever they asked, what are you going to do with your life if you get a new heart, and he said, well, I want to do mission work with my friend. He didn't waste any time. And I'm so thankful for that. He lived in Bakersfield, California at the time, and actually within a week or so after they came back from Latvia, he and his wife Jazz moved down to Austin to attend Southwest. And so he's studying to be a preacher, and so I'm thankful for that. He still has a lot of challenges, and when we got to Amsterdam, we met in Amsterdam. He flew directly from L.A., and I came from here, but his flight was late landing in Amsterdam. The guy wore a brand new pair of shoes, traveling, and didn't let him carry him, and he walked fast from one end of Amsterdam airport all the way to the other. And it's not like Kansas City airport, okay? These big airports, think going to terminal, to the international terminal in Atlanta from check-in gate at Terminal T, okay? That's a long walk. And when he got there, I was glad to see him, but he wore a blister on his foot. Well, whenever you're struggling with just barely non-diabetic, and you just had a heart transplant, and you're careful of what you can take, medications and things like that, that became a problem for us. He ended up having a sore that never did heal the whole time we were there, because we were walking, and we ended up taking taxis a lot, but you still have to walk to the taxi, and you have to walk from the taxi to the store to wherever you're going. But he's a very evangelistic-minded man, and so while we were there, he didn't waste any time, as I didn't, getting out to people around where we were staying and trying to meet new people and talk to them about the gospel. And, you know, he'd go to a little restaurant when I wasn't looking, and I'd talk to him, and he'd already eaten. But he'd been down the street a few doors and talking to them and trying to talk with the young men about coming to worship and studying the Bible and stuff like that. And that's what I would do, too, when I was going around different places. So he's a very evangelistic-minded young man, and thankful that he was with us, even though we were both, in fact, my ankle got sore the second week. I could hardly walk on it, which really was kind of discouraging. It got all twisted and sore, and I don't know what happened, but anyway, it was a struggle for both of us. But we did the best we could, This is a picture of the old Riga, and it looks about like it did before. If you've seen pictures, there's some new construction, as you can see at the top left of the picture, across the river. But it's still a very beautiful place. And that picture was taken from this tall building on the left in the picture, and that is the Science Academy building. And the church meets actually in that building now. The church used to meet in a building just behind this little structure. You could, if you knew what you were looking at, okay. You knew what you were looking at, you could see the roof right about there. But anyway, that's where the church used to meet. And right now, the church meets in that building right there on the 5th floor. There's an elevator, but that's nice. But anyway, this is the central market, which today is still the largest open market in Europe. World War II, after World War II, they moved these big airplane hangars and made these big pavilions. And like in here, you can get fish of all different kinds, and one of them's a dairy pavilion where you can get eggs and dairy and cheese and stuff like that. And the other one's vegetables, and over here is meats of all different kinds. And then there's outdoor selling and clothing in those buildings back behind. So it's a huge market. It's very central. Everything, all the transportation from the city goes in there. The train stops just across. In fact, here's the, oops, that's not what I wanted. This is the bus terminal right here. And so, oh no, that's a shopping center. The bus terminal is right here. Central, buses go all over Europe that leave right there and all over the country. And then the trains come right along here, and the train station is just off to the left, just out of view. So, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better location. If you're going to only have one congregation in the city, you really couldn't ask for a better location. They say it's location, location, location. I think there's something more to it, actually, when it comes to the church. This is a picture of the Blackheads Guild house. It was reconstructed while I was living there the last time, from 2004 to 2008. This is a notorious place. Just in the yard, just off to the right of this picture, is a marker where the very first New Year's tree was ever decorated in the whole history of the world, and later those became Christmas trees. Has nothing to do with any religion. Okay, decorated trees at that time of the year had nothing to do with religion. Had to do with wanting to celebrate the New Year, and it was a business guild that regulated international trade to make sure trade was fair. And they would actually do things to, they had some authority to actually punish people who were caught cheating. And there's another story, but I could tell you another time about that. But anyway, there's a lot of beautiful architecture, and I saw a photograph of the old building that was destroyed in World War II before it was burned down, from an old woman who used to come to our worship and studies a lot, and it looks almost identical to it. So they did a beautiful job with it. But anyway, it's an old city. Some of the old buildings date back to the 1300s that are still being used in the old city. And you can see parts of the old wall in different places if you want to go there. I recommend that if you ever have a chance to go take a tour, it's a good place to take a tour in the summertime. In the wintertime, it's kind of cool. We rented apartments in the center. That's one of the downside of not having an apartment there any longer, is not having a place to stay when you travel. But we were able to rent apartments pretty inexpensively. This is the apartment that I stayed in, and I'm standing by the bed, and you can see in the kitchen there, and there's a bathroom here, full bath with a washing machine, and so we were able to do laundry. There's a nice kitchen, but I got stuff to make brownies. You know, people want you to make brownies if they know you know how to make brownies, and they haven't had them for 10 years. I got all the stuff I needed to make brownies. Get back to the kitchen, and then I realized there's no oven. There's a microwave and a stovetop. Beth might be able to succeed in making brownies on a stovetop. Randy's not ready for that yet. So, okay, but it was a small apartment. Mark's apartment was adjacent to this one, so we both had some private space. I had good Wi-Fi. Anyway, but it was affordable and conveniently located. So it gave us a chance to stay in the center. stayed. You can see where we stayed up there. It's just not that far from the center. In fact, whenever I moved to Latvia in 2004, at the beginning of 2004, my first place that I stayed was one block further, just down here, just past that little street, down in this area. So I was very familiar with the area, and that part hasn't changed a whole lot. So those old buildings. This is where the church used to meet whenever I was living there for many, many years, and then this is where the church meets now. So again, you can see the train station and the bus station and the market, all right around in that area. So that's kind of a real active area. Okay, this is the way people get around. The buses and the trams look a lot different, but I can tell you that that's the same old tram, just with a paint job. Okay, but it looks nice. Anyway, they've changed a few things about the public transportation. We bought bus passes or transportation passes so we could just take the bus and the tram and the electric buses, and they call them trolley buses. Because of his foot, we ended up having to call taxis more often, which kind of added to our budget a little bit. But you either do it or you don't go. Because he could not walk the 3 blocks to get to the trolley stop, and so the tram stop. So I wanted to reconnect with some of the fallen brethren, and we had the chance to meet with Antra. Antra is the woman here, and you've heard, if you remember reports from the past, there was a brother named Casper, and he obeyed the gospel a long time ago, and when I was living there the first time from 1993 to 95, and he taught her and baptized her, and they became husband and wife. And then later, while I was in the States, he started and had an affair and wouldn't stop it, and so she put him away. And but she got so discouraged about that, and Satan used that as a tool, a weapon against her, and she fell away. And we've tried. When Wayne and Mike Wyatt and Wayne Brewer go over there from time to time, they'll come to the meetings and things like that. And they promised that they would come to the meeting our times. We were there, but they never did show up to the services. We met them one evening, and this is their little girl, Katrina. She was not that big, 8 years earlier. Okay, she's 18 now, and so she's starting to study at the university. And so she was very little before. But anyway, we talked with them, tried to get them to come back, talked with them about the spiritual matters, and Katrina was the more vocal, and she said, it's just not for us. It's just not something we're interested in. And that's just the young people in our country, they're just not about that anymore. And I thought, what's the deal with this? I'm thinking, what about being lost in hell is for you? What about going to heaven is not for you? But the people don't think about the spiritual things. They think about what I want for my everyday life, and they're not thinking about the consequences of the eternal destiny. And I was disappointed that Antra didn't try to help her. But that's what happens when people fall away, and they get farther and farther. It gets easier and easier to forget. And so we tried. Met with Brother Rowland and Sister Via, and I enjoyed the visit with them. It was really hard to talk with them. They fell away after some incident with Victor, and he said something, and he was tired, and he was upset about something, and he flew off the handle and said something that he regretted and he apologized for, but they left. And they've never been back. She'd come back sometimes for whenever Wayne and Michael were there. She did come one evening whenever we had a special lesson one Monday evening, but he won't come. But they said that it's just an attitude. He said whenever you left, Randy, things changed, and the whole attitude was different. And I don't know what to do about that, because if I was there, I probably wouldn't worship with that congregation either. I'd start another congregation, but they're not at that point in their life. So it's kind of a challenge. I tried to encourage them to be bigger than him, and bigger than the other people that might upset them, and do the best that they can. But again, it was kind of a disappointing thing. We tried to call Valentina. I spoke with her. She was excited that I called her, but she was sick, and she would not let us come visit her. She was sick, and she didn't want us to get it, and she just insisted that we not come. That's Maxim's wife, and Maxim was always very instrumental in a lot of the activities that went on, and he passed away. And then she was faithful for a long time, and then after we came back to the States, she fell away within a couple of years. And we tried to get her to come back, but she just was too sick to get out, and I don't know if there can ever be anything there. Now, what about the faithful brethren? I wish I could really come back and say, hey, this has been the best trip of my whole life. Unfortunately, they don't all go that way. Okay. It was kind of a wake-up call, actually. This was, some of you will remember Svetlana, and she's still a faithful, godly Christian woman. And she came here just for the lectureship during her vacation several years ago. And she took a couple weeks and just came for that, and she still talks about that. She's a godly woman. These others are people that are still faithful to attend. Guntus, I like Guntus. He used to be one of my neighbors whenever I bought an apartment over there when I moved there in 2004, and he lived in my same building in the next door. When I saw him, I thought, I didn't know you lived here. But he is one that I really do like. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. I think that he believes the truth. And he's had some disagreements with some of the other people there over the years that have come. But, and this is Victor standing next to Mark there. And I think this lady's Ligita, if I remember her name correctly. We didn't spend a lot of time with her, but anyway, that was her birthday, and they gave her some chocolates or something. But this was after the worship services. Everyone else left before we took the picture. There were actually about 4 more people there that Sunday when we came. And you can see Mark looked pretty beat up. That was the second Sunday we were there. And he preached that morning even, but he was kind of weak physically. And so, but anyway, we had the opportunity. This is the attendance from that second Sunday morning. We didn't get pictures of the attendance for the first Sunday. The first Sunday we were there were actually several visitors that showed up from another city that came, and they came to the wrong place, but they stayed for the worship services. And we thought we were going to get some studies with them, and it just fizzled. It seemed like that was the way it went a lot this time. But you can see, and there was a young man named Arthur, and he came both Sundays, and he had just come from the States. He was staying with a family in the northeastern part of the States, and they had contacted Victor to try to see if he could help Arthur when he gets back, and he'd been going to church with them and things like that. And so he came. That was his introduction to the Church of Christ, however. And Mark and I actually took him under our wing and tried to study with him, and we had a couple nice discussions with him, but he lost interest real quickly when it started meaning you have to change some things in your life. But they always have a little snack after worship services before going, and they still do that. That's a custom that they've been doing for many, many years now. We did try to make some new disciples. This is at a young... It's an orphan's home where Victor goes on Saturdays, and a lot of them he met through a camp that they have every year there in the summertime for orphans and young people around the country. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but these are young men who we had a Bible study with. We were able to there's usually, he said, 2 or 3 others that attend, and they didn't show up that day. And it was enjoyable to try to have a chance to study with them, and there seemed to be a little bit of interest in that. I think there's been one young man that lives there who has obeyed the gospel, but he wasn't in attendance in our study that Saturday. I met John Henry. He was Gunnar's grandson. And this was in 2010 when I was there to help bury his grandpa. I took him to the cinema. It was a 3D cinema, so I took a picture of him. I had to send him a picture I had to give him a picture of that because he didn't see that picture till this trip. But that's the way it looks like now. So now he's 18. After his dad died, his grandpa was the one he came to worship all the time. Came to Bible studies. He would hang out with me. Every time Gunnars and I would go do anything to study with people or anything, if he was available, he would come with us. After his grandpa died, his mother just about went crazy and just lost interest in everything, including her son. And so he ended up moving out, being taken away from her, and he's living with his grandparents on his dad's side. His mother and dad were never married. He never met his dad. They were planning. They were planning to get married, but his dad got killed in a car wreck before he was born, and before they got married. And so, Marika never had obeyed the gospel, and Rowland, his uncle, used to come. Both of them used to come sometimes to services, and they promised that they were going to come to our services and didn't. I talked to Giannis. I had a chance to meet him, and a couple of different times. He came to the apartment on this particular occasion. He said the same thing. It's just not for me. Thought we'd have a chance to reach him. And you might remember this Sveta. She was here too. She came and spent a month. And Lizzie will remember her because she spent several days in your house. She had a chance to attend the lectureship some, and when she went back, she was asking Bible questions and talking about worship and studying the church. And she was just a young girl at the time, 15, and her parents didn't let her go all the way across the city to come to meet with the church. I tried everything I could later. I met her. I didn't have much time. She was getting ready to leave the country right after we got there. So I met her for coffee. Mark was letting his foot heal, and I went to meet her at the train station, and she wanted to get a picture, and I'm glad we did. But she was leaving on the 2 days after that, and she never did come to services. Again, I tried to talk with her about the gospel, and she's just not interested in talking the Bible. She just wants to change the subject and talk about the world. I tried to talk with her about how important it is, and it's just not for me. This is a lady named Anessa. She lives in Jelgava. She has 3 children, and I knew her because she was an acquaintance of someone that was a close friend of mine when I was living in Latvia. And I never had met them face to face, but I did have a chance to meet her, but I didn't take a picture at the train station when I met her, so that was my downfall. This is from her Facebook page. But she came and we had a nice discussion. We talked about the Bible, talked about religion in general, talked about the church. She talked about how hard it is for people who grew up in the Soviet times to change their way of thinking. But she promised that she was going to come with her son the first Sunday, and never came. Promised that she's going to come the next Sunday, and never came. Promised she's going to come the Monday night. We had more lessons, and didn't come. So we tried, and we still have some communication. I sent pictures of Hannah, and she was real interested in all that, and so maybe we'll have a chance to influence them, but it's going to be a long, hard road. And this is Svetlana again. Now, she married Igor. She was dating Igor the whole time that I knew her in Latvia. And so they're married now. And this is her mother, Valentina. Valentina, I had studies with her before. She never has obeyed the gospel. And she's in very, very poor health. We just found out last week she had to go to the hospital, and she's not doing very well. We met this a little Indian cafe there next to their apartment, which was just a couple blocks away from the apartment where Mark and I rented. And Igor, he used to come to our gospel meetings sometimes, and he would come because he had a particular interest in certain Bible questions that we would be talking about, but he's never been regular to attend the services. And again, we kind of reached a dead end trying to talk with him about the gospel. Valentina, she objected to God because she could not accept the idea that little babies that are so innocent are guilty of sin. I said, and this was years ago, I said, do you know that the Bible doesn't teach that? She goes, really? And we opened up the Bible and she said, I didn't know that. But that's what she wanted to believe, that babies they don't carry the guilt of their father's sins. But her other objection, and she never has gotten over that, is the idea that in the Old Testament God would allow people to go out and slaughter the enemies whenever they would conquer a city. And she just couldn't accept that. And I was never able to get her to go beyond that. We tried to get her to come, but she's just not open anymore to that, even Bible discussions after the things that have taken place in her life. And I guess I've exhausted those. Now this is Artur. He lives in Riga. This was after he came on the first Sunday, and we went to the market with him and took him to lunch, and we had a nice discussion. We were trying to set up Bible studies with him. We had some good discussions. As it turns out, he was living with a family in the States who Victor considers brethren. But they're denominational people. Instrumental, I don't even know the name of the church that they were attending. And to Victor, they're just brethren. And so he wasn't trying to convert him, but he's never obeyed the gospel. And we tried to study with him, and then he started avoiding us after the second time. And so we kept texting him. He kept saying he'd meet us, and he never would confirm at the last minute. He'd change his mind and things. So that's kind of the situation that we found over there. It's a little different than the reports that I used to be able to give when I come back from there. And it's heartbreaking. But when I think about the way the situation is in the church, the man who's preaching there now, Victor Barbic, we were riding in the car with him, and I was talking about my lesson that I was going to preach, and I gave him the lesson that I was going to preach, and he said, well, I only preach expository lessons. It keeps me honest. And I said, Jesus taught topical lessons. The apostles taught topical lessons. Philip taught topical lessons. In fact, I don't know of one expository sermon that you can find in the Bible. The closest one that you might go there would be maybe when Philip was teaching the eunuch. But I would think that's more of a topical or a textual study, not an expository study. And so, but what that means is I don't have to deal with topics that are controversial and that people don't want to listen to. That's really behind all that. So they're not getting meat. Even though the guy has knowledge of the Bible, they're not getting meat. Maybe that's part of the problem. Expository sermons, by the way, aren't bad, okay, if you know how to do it. And if you're willing to allow it to say what it says. But the implication is that if you teach anything besides that, you're not being honest with the Scriptures. So I guess Jesus wasn't honest. Regarding obeying the local laws, we were going around and Mark said, is it okay for us to go out and pass out leaflets here or invitations and things? Do we have to have a permission for that or anything? Victor said, well, technically probably yeah, but you can't sweat the small stuff. You got to look at the big picture. Basically, what the law says doesn't matter. You know what Peter wrote about that? Peter said, be subject to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether they're the king, a supreme, or in the governors, as sent by him for vengeance on evildoers, and to praise, and for praise to them that do well. For so is the will of God, that by well-doing you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. when you have a preacher whose attitude is the law is not that big a deal unless it's just the one you like to follow, then maybe that explains why there's nothing substantial people learning when they come to worship, and there's why come back there when I can go down the street and get the same kind of teaching somewhere else where it's more exciting. Regarding baptism, basically anyone who's baptized not as an infant who believes Jesus would be God, he would accept. Maybe that's also part of the problem. There's no distinction there. You know, whenever he said that to me, I talked to him about Colossians 2, verse 8 through 12, that a person has to believe at the moment they're being baptized that God is making them saved from being lost. And if they don't have that faith that God is acting on their souls while they're being baptized, then they're not obeying the gospel. Listen to that if it's not what it says. Colossians 2, 8 to 12. Take heed lest there be in anyone that maketh spoil of you through his philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ, for in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And in him ye are made full, who is the head of all principality and power, in whom ye also were circumcised with the circumcision, not made with hands, and putting off the body of the flesh of the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, wherein also you were raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. Your faith has to be that God is working on you to raise you from being dead in sin the same way that he raised Jesus from being dead. And if you don't have that faith when you're being baptized, you're not being baptized according to the gospel of Christ. But also, the other part that we talked about is the fact that in Acts chapter 8, the Bible says Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed unto them the Christ. Okay, you preach Christ. The man, not the plan, so to speak. The multitudes gave heed with one accord to the things that were spoken by Philip when they heard and saw the signs which he did. But whenever they obeyed the gospel, in verse 12, the Bible says, Acts 8, verse 12, but when they believed Philip preaching the good tidings concerning the kingdom of God and the name of Jesus Christ, they were baptized, both men and women. What is the kingdom in the Bible? That's the church. They were preaching about the church, about the kingdom. And you cannot be part of the kingdom of Christ unless you understand that there is a kingdom, that there is a church, that you have to be part of that church. And to ignore that and push that out and try to gray the boundaries and make them disappear and ignore them, maybe that's part of the problem why the church isn't growing there like we would like for it to be. Regarding instrumental music, I choose not to do that, but he's not going to draw lines of fellowship there. And they partner with liberals in what they call Camp Hope, and they even use denominational people and instrumental music people from the churches of Christ to come as the teachers to help push this camp. And they use the denominational people to come and help as kind of help to make sure things go well as translators and helping to teach and things like that at Camp Hope. And so I see that, where the Bible says, I beseech you, brethren, mark them that are causing divisions and occasions of stumbling, contrary to the doctrine which ye learned, and turn away from them. That's different than embracing them. And so I came back with a really broken heart. You saw the young men at the orphans' home. He goes there on Saturdays. We're driving over there. He said, if I'm over there after 6 o'clock, I encourage them to go ahead and take the communion. I said, on a Saturday? He said, yeah, after 6 o'clock. He said, we follow the Jewish calendar. I said, well, so you wouldn't offer communion after 6 o'clock on Sunday then? Well, I'm not going to get into that. So, basically, you take this one and this one, okay? Truth doesn't really matter. You know what the Bible says about the Sabbath day or about the first day of the week? We are not following the Jewish calendar. No Christian follows the Jewish calendar. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 1, and I pointed this out, but it just fell on deaf ears. Now late on the Sabbath day, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. That means that the Sabbath ended as it was beginning to dawn toward the first day of the week. You know what that calendar that's following? The creation calendar. And the evening and the morning were the first day. God does not teach us to follow the Jewish calendar. But I can tell you that several years ago, I was talking to a youth minister from one of the local congregations here over in Raytown, Missouri. And there was a group that were going out on a ski trip to Colorado, and they met on worship to take the Lord's Supper Sunday night or Saturday night before they left, so they wouldn't have to worry about stopping for worship on Sunday. This is not something that's new, and it's not something that's really unheard of, but it's not biblical. No apologies for ignoring the truth about the communion. Maybe that helps us to understand why the church is struggling when there's not distinctive teaching. When I was there, we taught the gospel. We taught things that people may not have been comfortable with, but they needed to hear. We even struggled. When I was living there the last time, it was very hard to get people to study with us. But if you don't offer something with some meat, then there's no way the church is going to survive. And what my opinion is that the church is, unless you could have 2 or 3 families of faithful, godly people that could move in as a team and work with it, I don't know that the church can ever move from where it is right now. The culture has changed. When I was there, it was fresh after the Soviet Union. You know, but now you have a culture that's full of postmodern thinking. And if you're familiar with what that means, basically, you don't have to use logic. Reason is not the way you come to the right conclusions. Anything but reason is what's acceptable in postmodern society. But they challenge the very thought, the idea that you can have a right way to reason and a right way to draw good conclusions. And this is being taught in the education system in Europe and in America. But materialism is also a great problem there, and it's grown even more so than when I was over there before. And for the older people, you still have the atheism and the skepticism, which are residual from the Soviet Union days. But I think that people like Anessa, who came out of that Soviet Union, I think that I've probably got a better chance of trying to reach her if we just keep after it, even from here, than a lot of these young people, because they're just the idea of God is just choked out of them. Think about that. It's worse than into the Soviet Union times. Now, what does that say? I'm sorry, but I wish I could come back and say, oh, this was the greatest thing for me. Honestly. We did a lot of work there. And I feel like that Satan is destroying something that we put a lot of work and effort into. And I feel like there's nothing I can do about it. And if you have ideas, I would welcome them. If you want to be a part of something to try to help to improve it, I would love to talk with you about that. But I don't see a lot of hope right now, unless some people with the will to really dedicate some longer time could go over there as a team and do a lot. Think that would work, and it could be successful. Barring that, I don't know what would work. But I pray to God that something will happen. We've talked about some of the doctrinal things tonight that are important. John wrote in 3 John verse 4, "Greater joy I have none than this, to hear my children walking in the truth." I wish that I could say that there were a lot of them walking in the truth. The one joy is Sveta. She's never going to waver in the faith. And I'm so thankful for her. To me, she's the last remnant of a great work. And maybe through her, doors can open. We just have to do the best we can and see where we can go in the future. Just like we talked about there, baptism is important. It matters whether we're going to be saved or not. It matters what you believed and whether or not you obeyed the gospel. I hope that if you haven't obeyed the gospel, you'll think about your life tonight to make it what it should be. Be dedicated to be more sound and more dedicated to truth than what we've seen in Riga. Please, let the Bible be your guide, not your feelings. Let truth be your guide, not your feelings. Because that's the only way that God can guide us to heaven. You're living the faithful Christian life, then I'm thankful for that. You're standing for truth, I'm thankful for that. If you've been weak in those things, then you need to make some changes. If you need to obey the gospel, if you need to come back as a Christian maybe who stumbled into sin or has gone off into error in some other way, other maybe physical sins or just doctrinal error, we hope that you'll make the changes, whatever they are tonight. Come back home. God is waiting. God is the one who can take us home and take away our sins. If you need to come, we hope that you'll do that tonight as together we stand and sing.